This programme was made with support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Welcome to the Heritage Channel, coming to you this month from the famous fish docks and mysterious Kasbar here in the heart of Grimsby. We'll be tasting some award-winning artisan products still produced here on the docks and finding out more about the past and exciting future from historian Emma Lingard. Emma Lingard is Communications Officer at APB and a specialist in local history. I caught up with her to find out more about the colourful past of these historic docks.
This is the historic part of the Port of Grimsby. It's a horseshoe shape, and we call this whole historic area the Kasbah. But right now we're going down Auckland Road. So all the streets on the port are named after the directors of the railway. So that's the Manchester, Sheffield, Lincolnshire Railway, or they were engineers associated with the building of the port, the secretaries, the solicitors. What is great when you come down here is despite the fact it's undergone so many changes, it still has a strong story to tell through those street names, but also through these wonderful old buildings that we've got left. Grimsby itself is a town within a town, because if you think there were thousands of people working down here, and if this is your place of work, you don't really want to walk off the port. And so things like banks started to come. So you can still see the decals on the windows there saying Lloyd's Bank. And then at the very end of this row, we have what was a post office. You know, things that sometimes you don't imagine are on a port, but you've got to think it was a little town. Now, this building was built in the 1920s and redeveloped, and we have the original architect's plans. And this was built for the Grimsby Vessel Owners Exchange. So it was that group of fishermen that came together, and upstairs with that beautiful bay window, that was their boardroom. And when you look above, you can just see the masts, because obviously they're communicating with their trawlers out at sea, and they're obviously talking via radio. When Grimsby was first developed, one of the big pluses and why it developed as a town and the port was because of the railway. So it arrived in Grimsby in 1848. Came to the docks under the influence of people like Sir Edward Watkin. And when you look at the layout of the port, you can clearly see how the railway was dominant, because if you look at the building just here, can you see how it triangulates? So a lot of the buildings were built around the railway lines, and that's why some of them are these real unusual shapes. So this is Cross Street. So in Cross Street, we had a lot of railway lines coming in, going straight over, because the pontoon which snaked around the port from Murray Street was over a mile long, said to be the longest fish pontoon in the country. And where Cross Street comes out onto Warncliffe Road, that was the original entrance to the fish market. So the railway lines went straight up there. This street is the entrance into what is called the Square by a lot of people, but this is the original Kasbar. So when we walk into this, we're walking into a triangle, and we've got buildings surrounding us And in the centre, where these vans are, you can see the outline of where the original buildings were. So it was a closely compacted space with narrow streets intersecting it. A lot of smokehouses were in here. And at some point in its history, and we've got records which show the use of the word Kasbar over many, many years, somebody who either worked here or was a visiting sailor or merchant, but somebody who was well-travelled and knowledgeable, came along and thought it looked like a Kasbah. So Kasbah is an Arabic word for a fortified town. So when you've got a set of buildings encircled by this wall of buildings, from looking down, you've got a fortified area. So this is the original Kasbah. We should embrace those things, because what it's demonstrating is, one, that Grimsby people were travelling and were well-travelled and educated, and that we were doing trade deals and links across the globe, and that's what a port does. Ports are a great place to be because of those global connections. So that is a great illustration of how Grimsby was so great in what it was able to offer the town.
Alfred Enderbys have been smoking fish here on the docks for over 100 years. Its award-winning products have been praised by local chefs, discerning diners and international restaurateurs. Current custodian of this historic artisan food producer is the appropriately named Patrick Salmon.
Alfred Enderby had been smoking fish here in this traditional smokehouse for over 100 years. Prior to that, it was a smithies and it was converted over 100 and probably 10 years ago into a smokehouse. And this really is a specialist operation, and I wanted to preserve its character, preserve its uniqueness, and I saw the potential. Alfred Enderby is a protected food name. There aren't many protected food names in the whole country, and Grimsby has a protected food name, which is Grimsby Traditional Smoked Haddock. There are only a few left now in Grimsby that do it this way, whereas back in the 1930s, pre-refrigeration, there were 90 smokehouses like ours in Grimsby. Historic buildings are part of our heritage, and Grimsby's got a great heritage, and we now need to just grab hold of the opportunity that exists with Historic England and the conservation programme here on the Kasbar, and look after this building and many other buildings that we have.
In other heritage news, Great Grimsby Day, held in January, celebrated all things great about the town, including the fascinating paintings and objects in the town hall, acting as a window into the history of our beloved town. North East Lincolnshire Council has been awarded £18 million of levelling up funding to transform Cleethorpes seafront. Leading landscape architects Gillespie's will play an integral role in the rejuvenation of the historic square, adding space for social interaction by reconnecting our busy seafront and town, creating jobs and boosting the economy. City of Lincoln Council and Heritage Lincolnshire have secured funding from the Architectural Heritage Fund to bring iconic Mitchellgate buildings back into life. Dating from the 16th century, the properties will provide much needed holiday accommodation in the historic town centre, and works will commence this month. Meeting us at Albert's is an exciting new project from Elios Collective. Thanks to support from North East Lincolnshire Council and Arts Council England, they will explore the story of Albert Gate and the rich printmaking history of our area.
You've got all of your sort of physiological benefits to mum and baby, but it's also a huge part of a bonding experience, I think.
When I'm breastfeeding her, she makes some sounds. I repeat them. kind of communicating with me, we bond.
I always say it's a labour of love. It's sometimes hard at 3 o'clock in the morning when you've been up at 2 and 1, but actually nobody else gets those extra cuddles, nobody else gets those special moments.
I realised how just special it was, how I felt like I was still carrying on that journey of like growing him, which started when I was pregnant.
Didn't realise it was going to be such a passion for me until after I actually started breastfeeding. Really happy that it worked for us, and it's still working for us.
So we're on Fishdock Road. You can hear the sound of construction work because a port never stays still. But what is great down this road is we've got a real interesting mix of architectural styles. So when the port was first laid out, each was laid out in a building plot. A leaseholder took the plot on with a provision that they built the building. So depending on how wealthy you were, your building is either really extravagant, like the old Coasalt building with the coat of arms of Grimsby and the date stone, or it's really plain, like the old Ice and Ocean, which was a bank. But then we've got what is now Tom Taylor's beautiful building, and this shop front dates from 1908. When its owner, John Bygrave, put in plans to create a new shop front. So John Bygrave was born in Sutton in Norfolk, came to Grimsby because there was this big new fishing industry, and he was a fisherman's outfitter, and he made the waders and the oilskins. And he lived around the corner at 77 Orwell Street. And originally the store was called Yarmouth Store, after the great Yarmouth where he came from. And then later it changed to J.W. Bygrave, and then of course Tom Taylor has it. But it's a beautiful building, and it's done in the Low Country style. So if you think of Holland and you look up at the gable end, you can see a Dutch influence in the architecture here. But that's a wonderful old building. Just want to stop here because you might think, why have you stopped at a gap site? But these two buildings here are quite significant in the town's fortunes and how they changed. The building that was here was owned by Walker Moody, and the Moody family is a name that's been connected with the Port of Grimsby from its beginning. They were very instrumental, and Walker Moody had the Great Grimsby Steam Trawling Company, and he was influencing trawlers coming to the port and the development and bringing everybody together. Next door, that was the premises of James Allward. Now, James and George Allward were best described as fishing entrepreneurs. George Allward, throughout his time, wrote books on fishing techniques. He was an advisor to the British government as well on fishing. And George brought the first steam trawlers to Grimsby, the ones named after the signs of the zodiac. You know, these are important because it's telling that history. George actually went on in 1908 to give Admiral Charles Beresford 2 of his trawlers to go and test for minesweeping duties, and that's where the Royal Naval Minesweeping Service began, thanks to the guys that were here in Grimsby. So this is what many people know as the MTL smokehouse, which suffered some fire damage. It's now being rebuilt. I know it probably looks worse than what it is, but it's part of our big renovation programme that we're doing with the buildings that are in our care. It's another example of a smokehouse with a different kind of chimney, because it's a square chimney with the one big metal cowl on the top, so it's very different to all the others. And of course next door we've got what many people remember as TC's Club, the late Terry Chapman, the one place on the dock where you could get alcohol, and it had an early morning alcohol licence. Henderson Street is one of the desirable streets that the film producers like to use, because it's private, as you can see. It's got a lovely long line of old buildings with those distinctive features. So when you look up, you can see the davits, you can see the sail loft doors, and it's just that nice, authentic character. Ted, as we've been walking around, you can see we keep going in little wind tunnels, because those biting east winds that we get, freezing down here, but it's said to help with the smoking process. So I've stopped here just to point out the dock tower. Of course, that is the symbol of Grimsby. Everybody, when they're coming from land, sees that. And of course, it was used as a beacon by sailors to guide them to the port. But there's an interesting story. So in the Second World War, there was a plan by the British government to demolish the dock tower, because high-ups in the military deemed it to be used by the Luftwaffe as a guide to guide them to come and bomb the ports, because of course Grimsby and Hull were impacted by that. Now, some papers that came out after the war in Germany were from Hitler saying to his flying crews to not bomb the dock tower because they used it as a beacon to guide them inland. So you've got the Germans using it and the British wanting to pull it down. But then the RAF went to the British government and said, well, you can't demolish the dock tower because we also use it as a beacon. So in a way, you could probably say Hitler saved the dock tower from demolition in the Second World War. But it is, you know, today it's just that great symbol. It's still there, standing, you know, guiding us all back to home. Again, you know, here you've got lots of great work going on with all these buildings, and it's wonderful to see them all coming back into use. So this building has been taken on by the Petersons project. They've got this building at the front. And just talking about architectural styles, if you notice, this has got double bay windows. I mean, that's showing off a bit because, you know, not many buildings down here have got double bay windows. But clearly, when it was built, trawler owners had that magnificent view over fish dock number 1, and they're able to keep an eye on their fishing fleets and watch them come back to port as well. But the interesting connection with this building is that in the 60s, it's said to be where a phone call was made to the American embassy in London, warning them that President Kennedy was going to be assassinated. I think it was the next day. And it turned out that the chap that made the call was a relation of the person who had the building, and he was a double agent. Phone call was said to have come from Grimsby. You know, it gets involved with everything. But then again, you've got these beautiful old buildings here, you know, just showing the different wealth that the different people would have had throughout that period. And there's some interesting tales. Anybody that likes things that go bump in the night, there's a lot of ghostly activity going on as well, if you believe in that thing. Strange thing happened to me actually in one of those buildings with a very loud noise that can't be accounted for. So who knows? What you have got here, look, is the old railway track. So again, yeah, the railway to come in. The old pontoon was here, and you know, there are wagons, boxes going on, and they're going off out of town. And then of course in later years, when the fishing industry had declined and then we didn't need all that port, the dock side, then fish dock number 1, part of it got reclaimed, and it's where the current fish market now sits. But then we've got a lovely building at the end here that's just been done up, and this was originally built for bull pit and Robert, who were smack owners. And of course a fishing smack was a little wooden boat, and they were at the heart of some of that early development of the port. Interesting story behind these. So they're all built in the early 1900s. So again, just like we do today, buildings got reused or repurposed, or they were pulled down. And these buildings are beautiful red brick warehouses that were built for Moody and Kelly in the 1980s, when fish processors were trying to attract the big retailers to buy their fish. So old Victorian brick buildings didn't look very nice, they weren't appealing, not very modern. So the story is that the processors clad them all with this metal cladding to hide the architecture and make them look new. But in one respect, it's probably helped that it's protected the brickwork from those harsh elements. But again, as part of the renovation and refurbishment of this site, this cladding will come back down to reveal the beautiful windows and detail behind it. So really what we're following is the lines of the old railway. You can imagine, you know, back in that day, it's all hustle and bustle and exciting with deals to be had, and as more and more people come on, you know, it just grows bigger to the point where Grimsby fish was being exported globally, and the fish merchants and the trawler owners here, you know, start to explore new markets. So Ted, hopefully you've seen today that Grimsby still has a future. You know, we've got over 90 historic buildings here that are part of our big renovation programme, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. It is all exciting, and it's got an exciting future, hopefully, in being the new home for some of these, you know, startups or people associated with the film industry. Yeah, Grimsby's got an exciting future. Hopefully I'm here long enough to see it through.
The programmes on the Heritage Channel are made with support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund.